Hello, and welcome to the inaugural podcast of the Sisters of Thunder. And the Sisters of Thunder is the two of us. It's Kathy Baldock and Yvette Schneider. And the title of who we are comes from a dear friend, Butch Maltby, who one day in a conference call we were having with him listened to the dynamic of the two of us together and said to us, you two are like Sisters of Thunder. And we looked at each other and we knew we had finally found the name for this podcast. And this idea comes from a quite interesting confluence of two lives coming together. Yvette, why don't you tell us the story? Tell us who you are and the story of how we met.
Well, okay, it's 2015. Back in 1998, I started working for Family Research Council as a policy analyst. I worked a lot on hate crimes, employment non-discrimination, gay marriage, opposing those sorts of things, writing policy papers, lobbying on Capitol Hill, speaking at conferences. And I did that until 2001, when I was married. My first daughter was born. And then I started consulting for Concerned Women for America. I consulted for Athletes in Action, Fellowship of Christian Athletes. And then eventually I became the first director of women's ministry for Exodus International. And I worked at Exodus until, 2010, 2011, something like that. Well, in 2009, my daughter was diagnosed with leukemia, and that sent me into incredible anxiety where I was having panic attacks. And it was the first time, I went to a therapist and she said, it's not just the circumstances that you're in. Sometimes when you're not living in congruence with your true self, you'll experience anxiety as well. And I was in a unique position where all I was doing was caring for my daughter who was sick. So I got to silence all the voices around me and for the first time really listen to what my own soul was telling me. And it was telling me that what I was doing was not who I was. I was not living consistent with who I was. So I ended up resigning from Exodus about a year before they closed down.
And what year was that they closed down?
It was 2012. 2012 when they closed down. And I wrote a book about, it was a very personal journey about how I came to where I was, not only just LGBT affirming, but just who I am as a person. And I decided that my one chance to be open about what happened with me would be doing an interview with GLAAD. I had been contacted by Jeremy Hooper, and he wanted to interview me. And I thought, okay, this is it. And this is going to be my last hurrah. Everyone's going to know where I stand, because I felt that it was important. If I had been as outspoken as I was with the Christian right, I should be equally outspoken and at least let people who had followed me over the years know what I was doing and where I now stood.
Because you were still being quoted.
Because I was still being quoted. I was still online. Some of my ex-gay, former lesbian testimonies were still being pushed out by Christian groups, and I needed to set the record straight. So I did this extensive interview with GLAAD, with Jeremy Hooper, and they had me write an article. I wrote the article, and then the next day they published the extended interview. And I got this message, private message in my Facebook inbox from this woman, Kathy Baldock, who said, "Do you live in Reno too? Oh my gosh, I go hiking every day at 7:00. And I thought, oh my gosh, who is this woman? But I had heard about her from the people at GLAAD. And I just didn't know anything about her, though, but her name. So we agreed to go hiking, and then I looked her up, and I found the very first thing I found was this YouTube video of Kathy where she's getting manhandled and thrown out of a church, and she's yelling, "Don't touch me, get your hands off me." And I just have these images in my head of that woman from Dance Moms. You know how aggressive she is. And I thought that is what she's going to be like when we meet. And she's going to get up in my face about my involvement with the Christian right, and we're going to be out on the trail somewhere, and I'm just going to have to listen to her berate me. I had this whole scenario.
I'd have pushed
in
you
my
off
head.
the edge of a cliff into the creeks.
So we meet at the head of the trail to go hiking. And she comes and she gives me a big hug, and she was nothing like this Dance Moms woman I had pictured her to be.
And my piece of this is, so I read this interview with Glad, and I love smart women. I just love smart women. And Yvette, turn your head, honey. She is brilliant. Yvette is just a brilliant woman that knows how to present her feelings and what she wants to say. And the name of her book, by the way, is Never Not Broken, where she talks about having gone through therapy and Jungian dream analysis. It's really a fascinating book. Well, I'd read this interview, and I thought that the answers to Glad's questions, to Jeremy Hooper's questions, were just wonderfully thought out, precise answers that I really hadn't heard anyone else give such thoughtful answers. So I posted it all day on Facebook, like, listen to this brilliant woman, brilliant woman, brilliant woman. And then that night I get a note in my Facebook from my friend Scott in Sacramento. And he said, I found Yvette on Facebook. Thank you for inventing Facebook. So so much wonderful has come of it. And so he said, when she posts from her phone, she's posting from the same place you're posting from, the same place in Nevada. And of course, I never imagined that she could live here. So I figured she must be visiting. She's passing through rural Nevada, because Nevada is not the hot spot of anything.
People still think I'm visiting, because when Kathy and I spoke at Sparks Library, people asked Kathy, how long is she in town?
Like going on 9 years. So I was just so excited. So that's when I wrote to her, like, are you in Reno? Do you live in Reno? And then we find out we live 3 miles from each other.
And we talk about sometimes, here Kathy has her ministry, Canyonwalker Connections. And, not that long ago, I was working for Exodus International when we were 3 miles apart.
Yes.
But we didn't meet each other back then.
And we've become such close friends that it's just so interesting that what I've said is, if we had met 8 years ago, because I'm pretty capable in communication and I've done all my research and I could, go toe to toe with just about anybody. But the one person that now that I know Yvette, when she was on the other side of this equation, I think the one person that would have given me a run and perhaps caused a flutter of anxiety in me, because not many people scare me, it might have been Yvette, because she's so capable and knows how to communicate and knows how to research and so calmly presents the facts. And we're very similar in temperament in that we choose to have moderate conversations. So it's very interesting to have these conversations as we hike on a trail. Several times a week we go out together. And we thought, we started talking about this long ago, that those conversations that we have out on the trails, they should probably be recorded or maybe not recorded because of the things that we both know and get said. And so you, from the insider's point of view, from the inside of the religious right, and my position of having heavily researched this information and written the book, Walking the Bridges Canyon. So we've been thinking about this for a while, to do a podcast together, because so many of you are not so fortunate to go hiking with us.
Well, what I think would be interesting, since this is our first one, Kathy, is if you'd tell us a little bit about how you even became involved in LGBT rights activism.
On the trail. Isn't that interesting? I mean, all great things happen on a trail. I'm just so convinced that you talk about silencing the voices around you so that you can hear the purity of your heart, the purity of God, just the purity of what's going on around you. In 2001, I was just about to go through a divorce, or I was going through a divorce, and no one around me knew except for my former husband. And I couldn't talk to anybody about it. He asked me to be complicit in his secrecy with him so that none of our employees found out about, this mom and pop business going downhill, and to protect our children who were 14 and 15 at the time. He didn't want them to know. So the only place I had to process that level of pain, very painful going through divorce, was to go out on the trails. So every day I would go out onto the trails, and I'd hike, and I would talk out loud, and I would cry and just try to process this thing. And there weren't as many people out in the trails, 14 years ago. Now the trails are a little bit more crowded, but for being so close to an urban area, they're still pretty isolated. And I kept running into the same woman all the time. And she seemed to be hiking at the same pace I did. And one day, I remember it very, very clearly, it was a Saturday morning, and it had been a very stressful Saturday morning with my spouse, and he was applying a lot of pressure, and I had nowhere to dump it, and I didn't want to go back to the house. I just didn't want to go back. Now that he knew he was getting divorced, he was feeling a lot of emotional freedom, and I was feeling unbelievable, profoundly deep pain. And I just wasn't ready to go home. So I got to the bottom of the trail, and there was this woman that I had seen so many times hiking up the trail. And I just asked her, do you mind if I actually said to her, I've seen you so many times, and I felt kind of embarrassed that I'd seen her so many times and never even asked her name. I mean, that's just not my nature. Anyone that knows me knows I am the first to go grab a stranger in the room and say, hey, how are you? But, out there I was doing my pain thing. And I just said to her, I don't know your name. My name is Kathy, and do you mind if I turn around and hike with you for a while? And, today she's my best friend, and I've been hiking with her for a long time, both in the natural and the spiritual sense of it. And so I was a Christian that believed you couldn't be gay and Christian. That gay people made a choice to be gay, that it was some kind of rebellious spirit in them, or yes, they had been sexually abused. And I thought that their relationships were based in lust and not love. I'm telling you, I was the classic voice against the dignity and humanity of the gay community that we're hearing today. So I come from that tribe. I understand it. And as time went on, I had to look at what I believed. Netto let me into her relational circles, and often I would go to the parties and I'd be the only straight girl and the only professing Christian, and I was the outcast. But what a bunch of gracious people to have let me walk with them and to learn relationship. But yet it still took me 6 years in relationship with LGBT people. And, I had a friend named Tom in my Italian class. So the other thing I did so that I could honestly not fall into adultery while I was being cheated on and disregarded, I wanted to protect my own integrity. So I did, I kept my physical body busy by hiking, and I kept my mental body, my mental attitudes busy. I have a pretty active brain by challenging myself with the thing that was most difficult for me was taking a language. So I go out on the hiking trail and I meet a lesbian, and I go take Italian, and the person I'm partnered up with is gay. And no one had ever told me to my face that they were gay before. So in the two activities I choose to do to cope with my pain, I meet gay people for the first time in my life. And so it challenged what I understood. But still, it took me 6 years to look at the verses.
And you took the hint, though.
I took
when you have two people that you meet.
I'm not sure I took the hint. That would be giving me way too much credit.
Eventually you did, because you are where you are now. And I think that any true change doesn't happen in an instant. No. You may have a spark in an instant, but to me, true change is a process. Right. If it's going to be lasting, if it's going to stick with you.
And so some people, they would look at me and they'd say, oh, she's always been like that. She woke up one day and put a rainbow-colored boa around her neck and went out marching. Oh, contraire. So
and I think when you have firmly held beliefs, they're not something that are going to crumble overnight. It's just not going to happen like that.
So for me, it's quite understandable when I hear people still say the same things that I used to say, because I consider myself, fairly adept at reasoning skills, pretty well educated, and I held those beliefs. So it's been an incredible process. And in 2007, I got involved with the Gay Christian Network. And that was it. 2 feet in, never turned back. Became an ally first. An ally I see as somebody that'll walk alongside of you. And then an advocate is somebody that will stand in front of you, stand alongside of you. But when you're so tired that you can't fight the battle anymore, an advocate will just go to bat for you. But sometimes it's not just that I'm trying to take the place of somebody else or replace their voice. I'm really talking to my community. I'm talking to people just like me, like I was.
I think what's important, and you and I have talked about this many times, is that we have both come from the conservative Christian background. Mm-hmm. So we know who these people are. They were people that we considered family, people that we fellowshipped with, people we loved, people we knew
that were
deeply.
Us.
And we were like them. Mm-hmm. We were part of that tribe. Right. We were both part of that tribe for many, many, many years.
And we were both homeschooling moms.
Both homeschooling moms. Exactly. And what I think is important about that is that sometimes when you're on one side or another side of an issue, you can tend to demonize the people on the other side. No. But since we've been on both sides, we know what people are thinking because it's what we thought.
Right.
So it's easier to see the humanity. And I personally believe that also that only real change occurs in someone else when you can recognize, affirm their humanity, and treat them with dignity and respect, regardless of what their views happen to be. And I think that is what's missing in a lot of the dialogue today.
Yeah. And so what I've always noticed, and now we get to do this publicly, we do presentations. So we do public presentations on the history that I've uncovered in the book. And Yvette is an incredible asset to this equation, as Butch well saw, that this combination of the two of us does create Sisters of Thunder. We're outspoken, and we do know a lot of information. But the other thing I think we both are is incredibly gracious and moderate in tone, and we're not mudslinging, name-slandering people. We care about information. We care about people. We care about how people are presented. I care very much when I write and report to not lie, to not exaggerate, to not misrepresent people, to not misrepresent or leave out information. And we're always talking about those things. We talk about those things as we're walking. And what I find so fascinating is that I'll have a piece of a story that I've researched, or I lived through as an outsider position, or lived through the history with the LGBT community for the last 14 years of involvement. But you have the other side of the story. So what I've found many times as we're walking along, and I can say a name and an incident, and you'll bring the other side of that story, which opens up and affirms or just gives another piece of information, so that we're not trying to demonize people, but boy, together, we sure have a lot of understanding. And I'm just going to say it. I think women often see things very differently than men.
Very differently. So when Kathy and I were hiking, before the Supreme Court decision on marriage equality, Kathy was talking about what she foresaw happening once the decision came down. And we did talk about that quite a bit. And Kathy predicted fallout from, against the LGBT community, not just as a community, but as individuals. We knew there would be attacks on the organizations and on LGBT people as a whole. But you knew that individual gay and lesbian, bisexual, transgender kids would be attacked by their families. And I think that's something others didn't see coming, but because you have your ear to the ground and you're so connected with the grassroots, you saw what was coming before it came. And then when the decision came down, sadly, you were exactly right.
Yeah.
So I know you had been talking to me about some of the mail you've gotten since the decision came down.
So what I find really interesting is I went to a party last weekend, and there was a social media expert there that worked for a company that kind of looks across all forms of social media and says what people are really talking about. They listen, right? So they listen on Facebook and Twitter and Instagram and Reddit. They listen. So they know what people are talking about rather than being told what to think or being told what we should be thinking about. There are people that listen. And having a blog and having a YouTube channel and being pretty well connected and being accessible. I have a reputation of being friendly and accessible. And so Yvette makes me laugh sometimes. She says the picture of me smiling that is on some of my media stuff, it's false advertising because I really am, I'm not as much of a pushover as I appear to be.
Right. That's a nice way of putting it.
So I listen, though. I listen, and the way I listen is in my mail, and it is very grassroots because I see patterns that will become big before they do. I saw Christian parents of gay kids, trans kids, entering this conversation probably about a year and a half before they started really showing up. And I can watch the patterns of my communication change. I listen. I'm a place where people come and freely speak, and I hear what they're saying. And they're not talking at the most low-level stuff of this about bakers and photographers and the things that other people want us to think are the important issues. What I'm getting is a few kinds of mail, and they're so distinctly increased in volume, and they can really be categorized. And I think I can predict things pretty well, but what stunned me the first week after the SCOTUS decision was the increase in really difficult mail from young gay men. So the families aren't so much, even according to the patterns we know from research, that the pressure is always on gay men. The book explains this incredibly well, that gay men, in our perception, acting like women, is more of a pressure point than lesbians.
Right.
So young gay men, as soon as this decision came out, it is almost like Christian families were given the permission. I'm going to say this accurately, and I am not exaggerating. And it's so difficult. Christian families were given the permission to persecute their children.
Well, this is the way I see it, and it's the fear. This decision came down, and a lot of people had heard from pulpits, from right-wing organizations, that the worst was going to happen. And that is what LGP non-affirming Christians were expecting. This is going to be the worst. They're going to close down our churches. We're not going to be able to worship. We're going to be thrown in prison. All these extreme examples of things that couldn't possibly happen related to this decision. But these are the things that they've been told were going to happen.
Now, Yvette, from your past, this is a pattern, yes?
Absolutely, this is a pattern, because I remember talking about hate crimes legislation and saying, look, if a pastor preaches on Sunday that homosexuality is a sin, and the next day some gay kid gets killed, guess who they're going to come back to? They're going to come back to the pastor of that church, saying that he incited violence. This is when we were talking about hate crimes legislation. And that's the sort of right that now you're going to be arrested because you have incited violence against a protected minority.
Right.
That's the sort of thing that we would say. And it's not just something that we would say. We actually believed that this is what was going to happen, that the progression was going to be the silencing of Christians. So now you have these families who have heard that this is what's going to happen, that we're on the brink of religious persecution. Mm-hmm. And what are you feeling? You're feeling fear,
shame,
especially
shame. Also.
Shame. You have a gay child.
Yeah, you've produced a gay
in your
child.
House. Anger, because the decision didn't go the way you wanted it to go, and now you're feeling threatened. And from what you've told me about the mail you're getting, there's a lot of desperation.
Lots of desperation. I got two. Well, I'll and I still don't know what happened to this child. Late night letter saying, I don't know if anybody even checks this blog. I don't know if anybody checks this mail. But this is what happened. I decided to talk to my parents. The decision came down. I decided to talk to them. 22 years old, I think he said he was. I get so much mail, but I think this one was 22. Don't know where he lives. All my sleuthing, all my good sleuthing, can't find him. And talked to his parents, and his mother and stepfather just came absolutely unglued. And that very night, they were throwing him out. And he was leaving with a bottle of pills in his backpack. And I can't find this child. And it's what I felt like when I read that note that night. And I responded right away and told him, please get a hold of the Trevor Project. Which made me also on my blog to put up an emergency page. Like, if you've contacted here to say this, please go to the Trevor Project. Because I'm realizing that I am a go-to point now, or one of the go-to points. So I want to point to the people that are professional at this. So I felt, though, that this young man was leaving some kind of a record, like I was here. What a desperate situation. And I got those letters all week. And I've gotten them before, but I hadn't gotten so many. So I was getting letters from young people. I was getting letters from LGBT people that were so appreciative of the resource material I'd produced, because I knew I stayed up very late the night before the Supreme Court decision trying to put resources up so that people could be educated and have moderate, informed, productive conversations on this issue. And it's on my blog, Canyonwalkerconnections.com. And then I think I've tagged it to the top. It's just resources for having this conversation. And then the other mail that radically increased was my hate mail. Radically. And I don't think there was anyone that didn't profess to be a Christian. And I'm pretty used to getting bad mail, but this was a bit over the top of the aggression in it. And so I'm listening. So that's the point. I'm listening. And I don't think this one is going to go away quickly, which is why we've decided to do this.
I don't think we expected the time to go by this quickly. So if you have any resources for anyone who needs help right now during this time, can you say what they are before we stop?
Right. So there's parents. If you're a parent and you've got an LGBT child, the best thing you can do is to get associated with other parents that have also gone through this at different levels. And you can write to me at Kathy@sistersofthunder.org, and I'll help you, and I'll put you in contact with secret Facebook pages with mothers in different stages of this progression of understanding or not coping, and fathers. On my blog is that resources page. If you're an LGBT youth and you don't understand, same thing. Go to the blog, write to me. I'll get you connected. One of the best places I'm going to connect you, though, is right away, gaychristian.net. Online community, over 25,000 LGBT Christians and their supporters. If you're a person that wants to send me nasty mail, send it to Kathy@heretics.com. I won't even answer. Forget it. It's just a fake address. I've been told it all before. I was laughing with you a few minutes ago that the latest mail I got just before we started this said, maybe someday I'll turn my face and I'll see God and I'll go through a change of heart. No, this is the beauty of us. We've already gone through this change of heart.
Right.
So we didn't cover any of the topics on my 3 pages of notes that I gave you. You're always right about this, Yvette. You're always right about this. You're right. You're just always right about it. And I concede. I'll bow, bow, bow. And, but that's our heart. So, can you reiterate, too, our heart for having this discussion?
I think Kathy and I connected so well on the trail, and we were so in tune with each other and how we should discuss LGBT issues with graciousness and respect and offering everyone dignity. And we think that we're a voice that is sorely needed and that isn't out there, not just because of our tone, but because we're 2 women. And that's not common these days.
No. And educated on this issue, wide breadth of education. So we'll be putting up a 30-ish minute podcast of Sisters of Thunder each week with, thank you, Brother Sister Mark's help, who has really helped tremendously in getting this effort along. And we're going to try to stay current, but mostly we're trying to be a voice of reason and education and graciousness in this, because there's civil discourse that has to be had. And how do you keep both human dignity and religious freedoms and truth, and how do you keep all of these balls balanced? And we want to model that and educate. So
yes, very well said. So thank you for listening, and tune in again, because we're going to be doing these weekly.
Yeah, so Yvette's book, once again, is Never Not Broken. Really a deep, rich book. Mine is Walking the Bridgeless Canyon, and we are, by the time this airs, sistersofthunder.org. We'll be on Facebook. And come along with us on this journey, because it's your best chance of hiking and having these great, great conversations that we've had over the past year, and they're only going to increase. So thanks for listening, and we appreciate it. Hope to have you listening to us again. Thanks.